You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
There are thousands and if not millions of middle-class Africans and diasporans who also are locked out of opportunities to continue to grow their wealth and leverage their income to grow their wealth. So there are three major barriers that really come to play when we think about investing in a global fund, for retail investors especially. One of the major values that the fund is offering is the ability to build and grow wealth. 6 out of the top 10 countries in the world with the highest level of income inequality are in Africa.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people who are doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have another special guest. We have Kola Oyeneyin, who is CEO of Opportunik Global Fund, which is a private wealth fund designed by Africans for Africans. Welcome to the podcast, Kola. How are you?
So I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I've heard a lot about it, so it's finally great to be on this conversation with you. How are you doing?
I'm very, very well. Thank you. So where in the world are you today?
I'm currently speaking from Lagos, Nigeria.
Brilliant. It's fantastic to have you on the podcast. I think we've known each other directly for a while. I've followed you on LinkedIn and seen a lot of your great insight over the years. So it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. And let me just say that I think for me, what really attracted me to your podcast is the name, Unlocking Africa. I really believe that that's what we all should be doing, really, to unlock the continent for greater opportunities. So it's great to be here, finally.
Fantastic. As you've listened to the podcast before, you probably know I like to start from the beginning. So I was hoping you could please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Kola.
Okay, hi everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Kola Oyeneyin. I've spent the last 15 years of my life doing different things, most especially in venture creation and venture building space, with a background in technology. So built tech companies and then founding non-tech businesses as well. And I spent the last 5 years, going to 6, in finance and co-leading a global ventures and finance company. But in particular, now focusing on a very, very interesting private fund that is open to retail, which I'm here to talk about, Opportunik Global Fund. I'm super excited to be sharing about it as a deep believer in this decade being a decade for Africa and Africans, and unlocking this continent is extremely important for what is to come after 2030. So great to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic, and it's a pleasure to have you here. You've given us great insights into your history and what has led you to founding Opportunik Global Fund. So I was hoping you can give us a bit more information regarding the company, the work that you're currently doing in Africa or hope to achieve on the continent.
Maybe I'll start by just sharing a personal story. And I think that story would sort of underscore why we're doing what we're doing with Opportunik. In 2018, and by this time, by all accounts or by all indication, or at least from public assessment, I was considered maybe fairly successful as an entrepreneur on the continent. I had my personal capital or personal wealth, if you could say that. And so as far as being able to invest or continue to grow personal wealth was concerned, I was fairly ready. But what really became obvious between 2018 and for the next couple of years was just how difficult it became to access the kind of opportunities that I saw my counterparts in the West or the global North being able to access, simply because I was African and simply because I carried a different passport. So being locked out of what you could call global funds or different type of funds in the world that would return the kind of return on investment that you wouldn't get across the continent, I felt that I should be able to access that. I'd worked hard in my life. I'd built successful companies. I'd maintained myself as someone that people say had integrity. You were upheld a particular values that you hadn't broken. And so why was I being subjected to the kind of DD that other people, not on the continent, were not being subjected to? Even after you've gone through those due diligence, you're still told that, well, I mean, this fund, the entry for this is $250,000 or $500,000 or $1 million. And, we couldn't take your $50,000 because, you just don't belong here.
Yes.
And so for me, it just became a mission that, there are thousands or if not millions of middle-class Africans and diasporans who also are locked out of opportunities to really continue to grow their wealth and leverage their income to grow their wealth. And it became a personal mission between myself and my partner to really see how do we start to unlock opportunities for people like this. And that gave birth to OGF and Opportunik Global Fund. And I'm happy to talk about the structure of the fund and what it looks like. But that is the why. That's why we feel that this is a global fund for Africans who have been up until now locked out of global opportunities to grow their wealth.
Thank you for sharing that. So you've given us great insight into your personal experience trying to access funding and finance, which clearly shows us the why you founded Opportunik Global Fund, because the aim is to break barriers for Africans and the diaspora. So if we look at the barriers, what barriers specifically are you trying to break down?
So there are three major barriers that really come to play when you think about investing in a global fund, for retail investors especially. Number one is the access to the fund itself. So in that there's a cap or a minimum entrance to any fund that you want to access that are classified as global funds. And so you have minimum of say $100,000 and $500,000 to $50,000. So that's one barrier for most people who might have been hardworking in their lives, who might have earned a decent amount of salaries over time or profits of their business as founders, are still unable to come into those sort of funds. And so the first thing to do was it possible to reduce this barrier to entry? Could we creatively have a fund that reduces that? And the answer became yes. And so we were able to actually bring that down to $5,000 for an average investor to be able to invest, which means that, for most people who are listening to this podcast, by just the virtue of who they are, the falling demography of middle-class Africans who are able to come into a fund like that. And then the second barrier that we then had to break is the reward for that investment. And so typically when you come into a fund where you invest very little, you're almost punished for not being able to invest a lot. And so you get a shorter end of the stick, 2% returns, some as low as 1.5 or 3% maximum. Whereas institutional investors could be getting returns as high as 10, 12% on USD return. And so for us, we feel that, you shouldn't have to be punished for your inability to invest in a fund because you don't have $100,000 or $200,000. You should be able to be rewarded the same way an institutional investor will get rewarded. So again, to be able to create a fund that returns alpha, literally between 10 to 15%, and in some cases up to 18, 20%, depending on how the market is doing, is essential to the ability of the middle class to grow wealth. So that also was extremely important. The third barrier is the fact that because you're African, you're exposed to three major risks. You're exposed to the rising inflation across the continent, which many times is not even a fault of the continent. It's being created externally. And then so it's been affected, and the countries on the continent are being affected by rising inflation. The second issue with that is also currency risk. I mean, some countries in West Africa where the currency between their local currency and the USD fluctuation and volatility is extremely, extremely high. And then the third part is political risk. There's some parts of the continent where if you do happen to invest in an election year, you could literally lose a portion of your investment in that year. So we felt that we needed to, yes, it's a fund for Africa, but we needed to actually position the fund in an environment that was politically stable. So even if anything is happening on the continent, your wealth is protected and you're earning your return back on the continent. It's being managed in an environment where it's politically stable. So three things. One is reducing the barrier to entry. Second is returning high returns for you to actually build wealth. And the third part of it is shielding you away from inflation, currency, and political risk.
Fantastic. You've beautifully detailed the three barriers that you're trying to break down, which I guess make up key pillars of your wealth fund, which is a private wealth fund run by Africans for Africans. So what do you believe the importance of this is, and what additional value does it add?
I think when you think about how much cash is actually available for Africans to invest, it's actually quite incredible. I mean, Henley's report, I think the last report puts it about over $2 trillion that actually reside on the continent to invest, but possibly are not. There are no vehicles like ours to absorb that kind of investment and all. And when you look at the diaspora, which I also want to speak to, where you realize that in the last, say, 2-3 years, since 2020, actually, the recorded remittances actually have reached over 80 billion in terms of remittances that came into Africa from the diaspora. So there is capital residing out of Africa that is coming in as remittances, and then there's capital inside Africa. So in terms of value, one of the major values that the fund is offering is, number one, the ability to actually build and grow wealth. When you look at the way the world is currently structured, particularly as far as income disparity is concerned, 6 out of the top 10 countries in the world with the highest level of income inequality are in Africa. And there is no country in Africa that is on the top 10 list of countries with the lowest income inequality. What that simply means is that the top 10% in the world and the top 10% income and the bottom 10% income and are so far apart that the middle is extremely thin. There's almost no middle class. The second, so in being able to reduce that gap is extremely important for us. The second part of it is that most people, especially for people who have dependents on the continent, you might be working in London, you might be working in Germany, but you're African, or you might actually be working in Lagos, Nigeria, and you have parents back in the village. And most people are one crisis away from poverty, in that people who depend on them, if there is a major crisis, they could literally just be bankrupt. They could bankrupt just simply because of it.
Yeah.
So what this fund allows to do is to recognize the need for liquidity. And so that's why the fund actually pays out at the end of every year, because we recognize the need that you are actually not just investing to build wealth, you're actually also investing to create safety net for yourself and those around you. And I think for me, that's one of the most powerful part of the fund, that you're getting a very healthy return at the end of every year. And then you're able to apply part of it in reinvesting, but also taking care of immediate liquidity needs.
Fantastic. As we mentioned before, the fund is for Africans. Although the fund is for Africans, is it targeting a specific demographic? And if so, why?
Very good question, Cesar. So it's targeting a specific demography, and that demography is the middle class, mass-affluent, and the diaspora. And the reason for this, let me take it from the middle class and mass affluent, is simply because of, we believe that the entry barrier, yes, it's low compared to what funds allow for you to come in at $5,000. It's not a fund that could service what I could call the bottom of the pyramid, in that what is actually required to access the fund in terms of technology. It's a fund that could be subscribed to online and everything is all done seamlessly. So there's a class of people that the fund will be able to access. But the beauty of that is that middle class and mass affluence actually represents a very, very strong part of Africa, in that they are responsible for carrying pretty much the rest of those who cannot access the fund. So for us, I believe very strongly that if you're able to create a structure that ensures that the middle class survives and thrives, actually not just surviving, the bottom of the pyramid can rise. The challenge right now is that the top 1% is completely disconnected from the bottom 99%. And the middle is extremely small. What we're saying is that middle has the potential to really now begin to invest actively and access opportunities that were otherwise difficult for them before now. And then for the diaspora, we're simply saying that the reason why we're targeting the diaspora is that they have dependencies on the continent. And when you look at the entire diaspora network, whether it's the US or the UK or Brazil or different Asian countries, there are opportunities that are simply not available to Africans there simply because of the passports that they carry. We know what is going on in some markets in terms of just how difficult it is in KYC Africans in the diaspora to come in on an investment journey. And so this is why we're calling it a global fund for Africans.
Fantastic. Earlier, you detailed the 3 barriers or challenges that you're trying to break down, such as access, reward for investment, and some of the risks, such as currency and politics. So if we look at it from a different perspective, what challenges have you had to overcome in order to create this fund?
Oh, I think that's supposed to be maybe the most important question you've asked so far. You've asked some really, really important and good questions. But I said important because it's extremely difficult and almost impossible to unlock opportunity for others if you're able to unlock it first, either for yourself or be able to create a platform that will do the unlocking. So we're having this conversation now because you've created a platform with the podcast to, I guess, bring people like me on this show to let people who are listening to see that there are opportunities out there.
Yes.
I think I'll go back and just really speak to what I said earlier on about number one. Simply because I am from a part of Africa, specifically, and Nigeria to be specific, there are certain things that automatically get stigmatized with. And these are things that you have no control about. You were never a part of it. You didn't, and just simply because you're African and my passport is a particular type of passport, it makes it extremely difficult to say, I want to create a global fund. Now, if I were not African and if I was from another part of the world, I don't want to mention names, I carry a different kind of passport. It will be very easy to go about creating a fund. It's floated every single day and, you get by very quickly. But the kind of KYC, which is know your customer, which is also very important, even on the fund, we have to KYC everyone. But the kind of DD that you have to go through and the questions as to why you're doing this and, it's unbelievable. So ideally, a journey that should maybe take you a month and maybe ends up taking you a year, simply because you're from a region of the world, right? So I think for me, that's one of the major parts of it. And as we head towards launching the fund and going live on May 2nd, we're still having to do what you call deeper layer due diligence, simply because, again, whether someone is on a particular list or a country is on a particular list, and because you're from that country, there's more data to collect on you, and but after everything is all done and you still got the license, you feel like, okay, yeah, finally you've looked into my life, you found the thing, and so I think for me it also validates the fact that yes, you spent your life building things and the records are there, and you're able to walk into any regulatory environment in the world and get a license out. So we got a license out of the Cayman Island, very thorough regulatory team in terms of CIMA, that's the Cayman Island Monetary Authority. And then it's managed out of Mauritius in terms of the fund management. But the challenge has always been, as we onboard even partners, as we get on the platforms that would enable us to really, really deliver on the promise of the fund to Africans, we still every single day meet many of those challenges, but we keep moving.
Fantastic. Thank you. So you mentioned that the company is registered in the Cayman Islands. Is there a particular reason why you have decided to register the company from the Cayman Island?
Well, two reasons. First is we wanted a well-regulated environment in terms of setting up a fund like this. And that region and that country in particular has a history of just, multiple funds being set up there. They really know how to set it up and how this works. So that was one of the main reasons why we set it up in the Cayman Islands. And I think the second reason was what I was saying earlier on. If you are going to solve the problem of political risk and be able to solve the problem of currency risk, meaning that given the way the world is at the moment, the dollar is still the global currency. And then I think the final one is really just to ensure that in really helping the middle class to build wealth, they also have to have access to some of the things that institutional investors have access to. Yes, they are responsible for filing their own taxes and being responsible for reporting their capital gains and just sorting out their personal income tax. But we have a responsibility to also ensure that the same way the top 1% would structure their funds in regions that allow them to enjoy some kind of tax benefits, we also would do that. So which is also what the Cayman Mauritius sort of region allows for that to happen. So Cayman Island is, it's an important region for fund setup. Mauritius, which is where our administrative HQ is at, is an African country. So it's a combination of those delivers on our promise for the fund.
Brilliant. All sounds very exciting. And as you mentioned earlier on, the fund launches May the 2nd.
Yeah.
Although the fund hasn't launched, you have some big plans. So what's your expectations or your forecast with regards to the size of the fund in the next, say, 1 to 3 years?
Very good question. So, we go live in terms of core fund management from May 2nd. Actually, already started onboarding investors as we speak, both institutional investors. Actually, I would love to talk to you about the interest that institutional investors also have on the fund. Maybe we'll get to talk about that shortly. So we've started onboarding both institutional and retail investors via Opportunik.com. And literally from now, you could go there and create your account and start to go through the KYC process in readiness for subscribing for the fund. And I would love to talk about the structure of the fund in terms of that. But as far as AUM, asset under management, is concerned, we believe very strongly that given the way the continent is and the size of investable funds that are available, particularly with the retail investors, this is easily a $100 million AUM fund by December 2025. And that's our target. And for us, the story is important in being able to make it a 100M AUM fund, simply, again, speaking to the fact that Africans believe in what they create. This is a fund that has been created by Africans for Africans. And so that's my expectation as we start to onboard retail investors. Interestingly, the concept of AUM is that institutional investors who are African focused, but also haven't been able to have access to the kind of returns that allow them to effectively serve their own retail market or retail clients are also interested in our fund. And so because up until now, perhaps they've been getting maybe 8%, 7% return annually in terms of performance. And we have the structure and the team to deliver way above that market average for them. And they are African focused, so they are also getting onboarded on Opportunik as well. We're super excited about it. That's for me. Both retail and institutional investors are our target market. And as long as the values align, which is, Africa for Africans, and this fund really increasing the prosperity of middle-class Africans. And, we're happy to onboard everyone.
Beautiful. So you've detailed the type of returns that investors can expect. So if we look from the perspective of interested investors, how can they access your service? How do they go about doing that? Is it a simple process?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Starting first from, I'll just go through step by step, Opportunik.com, or simply just Google Opportunik Global Fund. When you get on the website, it literally just tells you everything about the fund, and it tells you about a few steps that you have to take. And typically there are 7 of them. One is to create a user account. And as you're creating that user account, you read the typical PPM, that's the private placement memorandum, that essentially that tells you everything about the fund, the structure of the fund, the governance of the fund, everything you need to know. And then you from there get to upload your KYC documents. And then you move from that to then waiting to typically no more than 5 working days to get your KYC verified, which is we have to know you and certify that who you say you are is really who you are. And then you complete the subscription agreement on verification. And then you pay for the subscription agreement, which is just $100 for the process of KYC and everything that DD requires. And then the final part of it is then you make your first investment. Let me just put a caveat around here that the documents that are going to be uploaded have to be notarized by a notary body, a lawyer or a notary agent. And once you have your document notarized, you upload it on the platform. There is an automatic, KYC system on the platform, Shofty Pro, that helps you just let us see your face and know who you are. And then you just go into making your first investment. Now, the minimum investment at the first is $5,000. And after that, there's a monthly optional subscription that you could have. So for people who have end of month salaries that they want to put aside for investment, you could do a minimum of $1,000 monthly on the fund as well. And beauty, like I said, is that at the end of the year, the fund actually does pay out ROI on the investment. So that's the journey in terms of really just coming on the funds platform. The website is pretty self-explanatory, and going through the process is pretty seamless.
That sounds very straightforward. I'm sure people will be listening and thinking, this sounds great, but how does OGF ensure the safety of investors' money, given the volatile nature of the current global economic environment?
Brilliant question. So this is one of the most important questions post-COVID. It was one of the most important questions post-2008 global financial crisis. And for me, it's actually an important question as a registered fund manager and the CEO of the company. There are 4 layers that we've put in terms of just ensuring that the fund is well balanced and well managed. At the first level of the fund is our internal fund management team, which I'm a part of, but also have a chief investment officer and a fund management team that essentially are responsible for the investment decision making. And I'll speak to sort of like the asset classes and how the fund is. This is more of the technical side of the fund, but I don't want to talk about technical jargons. But the fund management team essentially is responsible for managing the fund internally. But before the fund management team can actually disburse capital into any asset class, it goes through a monthly investment committee review. So our IC is made up of internal team members and also someone that is external who brings in a non-biased view from an external party to really look at every investment we're making every single month. But let me just say that most fund managers do this once a quarter. We do this every single month. And then at the next layer of that is we then have an external fund administrator called Acquivise. Now, Acquivise, as of today, has an AUA, that's asset under administration, of about $216 million. And so they are experienced in being able to administer funds like ours, ensuring that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed before funds are disbursed and things like that. So they actually go through the entire fund administration process. Then the fourth and final layer is the fund governing body in terms of advisory board of the fund that ensures, again, on a quarterly basis, that they're looking at how the fund is doing, how the different portfolios are doing. We believe very strongly that across these 4 layers, the funds are in good hands. But there's also internal risk management team that ensures that, looks at the asset classes we're deploying capital to be sure that we're not particularly or overly exposed to a particular asset class, that our trading team are trading. We have a market risk manager that ensures that our trading team are trading according to our trading philosophy. We have an investment risk manager to ensure that, we're not investing in assets that we shouldn't be investing into. So by the time you combine all of these different structures, we believe very strongly that safety and security is extremely assured for our investors.
Brilliant. Sounds extremely comprehensive and secure. So you've outlined the 4 layers that you put in place to protect people's investments and the criteria that you use to evaluate potential investments. So if you look at investments, can you talk about any exciting upcoming projects or investments that OGF is currently working on?
Yes, we've spent the last, even though this is what you would call our trade business secret sauce, so I'm not going to give as much away from that.
No problem.
I'll share the ones that I'm allowed to share. But look, I think one thing that became very obvious after COVID, Cesar, was that, the market is looking for a new type of capital. And the market is ready for a different kind of fund manager or different kinds of fund managers who are not as traditional as we've always had it. And I believe very strongly that we are that type of people. We're not coming from your core finance and, profit by all means and trade whatever as long as you make money and because you're trying to, no, that's not what this is about. The social part of what we do is extremely important, and that speaks to our ESG, component as well. Our mission to bridge, wealth inequality and all of that. So investing, we've been looking at really what I call alternative investment options. One of them, I'll just highlight one, is we've seen very exciting things in the commodity space over the last couple of years. They were pretty excited about that. Commodities typically would not be an asset that would sit on most fund managers or sit in most fund managers' portfolio mix. But we've seen very interesting yields that are happening within commodity space, particularly in Africa. I don't think we've been valuing our commodity space. So when we talk about commodities, oil, silver, and all of those different ones, but they're actually agricultural commodities on the continent that are outperforming what gold will do in a year. And because the reason is the underlying part of the African commodity are edibles, so food, and some of them are locally consumed while others are exported. And so commodity is a big part of our strategy. And of course, you have other known asset classes that are more traditional that will also be within the mix of our bag as well. Equities will be within the portfolio. And what makes the portfolio then interesting is just how quickly we dynamically, almost every month, we tweak the portfolio to be sure that it's responding to market dynamics as we spoke to earlier on. And so those are some of the investments we're looking at, across the continent.
Thank you for sharing that. So you mentioned something quite important, which is that the market is looking for a new type of capital and fund manager. So can you detail how OGF differs from other investment options available to Africans and Diasporans?
Let me approach it from 3 angles in terms of difference. One is in terms of access. The other is in terms of, financial freedom. And the third one is in terms of our promise in terms of return to them. So in terms of access, we've created a fund, literally one of the first funds in the world to be a retail fund that allows for investors to come in as low as $5,000 without discriminating in terms of, or without disparity in terms of the return to them. So whether you are investing in 100,000 or you're doing 5,000, we're literally distributing the same return to everyone. And without capping the number of people that can invest in the fund, we literally had to create this fund. It didn't exist. It could be patented. It's one of the very first, if not the first. And the differentiating factor is the fact that you're not negotiating returns with anyone. It's what you see that you get. That's the first one in terms of access. I think the second one is most fund managers globally, and if you look at the structure of hedge fund managers, look at the structure of literally the big investment vehicles. The concern many times has always been around, what the stakeholders get, what the fund managers get in terms of reward, in terms of performance incentives and all of that. And yes, we are interested in performing well and being rewarded for that performance. But for us, at the core of this is about the financial freedom for Africans and diasporas and for their generation. So we would be measuring how well off 100,000 investors or 10,000 investors over the next 5 years. So for us, that's a very important metric that would actually tell us that we are doing well. We're protecting investors against currency risk in their local countries across Africa. We're protecting them against inflation risk. We're protecting them against political risk. And we're rewarding them as well. And the third one, like I said, is the fact that we've literally created a fund that is putting an average investor at the table where, they would not have been without an OGF, without Opportunik. And the reason for that is, like I said earlier on, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And for many years, retail investors have always been on the menu in terms of returns. You get a short end of the stick, but this fund is putting you at the table to literally co-invest with anyone else, regardless of the ticket size that they are investing. And so for us, we believe very strongly. And also it's a fund that really prioritizes the security and safety of the capital. You're not going to successfully build wealth and you're not going to successfully invest over a long period of time if you lose your principal, if you lose your capital. So we're investing responsibly. We're very particular about that. And that's a major differentiating factor. Our traders are not reckless traders. These are people who understand the fiduciary responsibility of the fund and the promise of the fund to the investor.
Thank you for that. How do you believe OGF contributes to, say, economic development or impact in Africa? And going forward, what are your future plans in this area?
So one of the top 10 biggest issues globally and in Africa is poverty and wealth inequality, according to the World Bank and backed up by UN charters and UN data as well. And it's interesting that, poverty is still a big issue in Africa, despite the fact that we have actually spent quite a lot in fighting poverty. There have been so much aid given to Africa to fight poverty. I think for me, I've just come to a point where I realized that you cannot create wealth by fighting poverty. You create wealth by unlocking opportunities, hence the name Opportunik. For me, I believe very strongly that one of the major impacts we're going to have over the next 5-10 years with Opportunik is the obvious measure of wealth creation journey that thousands and hopefully millions of investors are going to be on through our fund. And for me, across whatever countries on the continent or even in diaspora where they're subscribing to the fund from, it will be one of the major impacts on the country as well. It essentially means they've actually broken that curse of poverty, and their dependence can also be lifted out of that through the same means as well. That's for us is one of the major things. And that's why, for me, the S in ESG speaks very strongly to our values and to what we're trying to do in terms of using wealth creation tool, which OGF is, as an economic development platform. And then in terms of what the plans are, first is to go live. So
Brilliant.
First is to go live and just ensure that we're able to onboard as many people as possible in the next couple of weeks, and then the fund actually begins to invest the capital into different structures. And the end of the year, December the 1st, set of investors get their returns or they decide to reinvest in the fund. And we will repeat that process over the next 12 months. That's the first goal. The second major thing that we want to ensure that we do is to really ensure that those who really should know about the fund, because again, in opportunity creation, sometimes it's limited. I'm glad that I'm on this podcast and you have your audience. Many times there are opportunities that are out there that people are unaware of. My plan is to ensure that there will not be a point where someone who should know about Opportunik or OGF, the fund, isn't aware of it. And that for me is a major part. And that's what is going to create the real impact of being able to serve 1 million retail investors across the continent. There is no fund today in terms of retail fund that serves 1 million people. I would love to serve 1 million Africans at some point, 10 million.
Fantastic. Thank you. So you detailed that one of the biggest issues is poverty and wealth inequality, which is a trend that you're hoping to buck through wealth creation. So if we look at trends, what trends in, say, Africa's wealth fund space are you currently excited about?
To be honest with you, I think the African wealth and investment space, it's been a bit conservative. In the sense that, we seem to always sort of wait for what the West does and how the West moves before we then move. So we wait until there's something called cryptocurrency before we jump on cryptocurrency. We wait until we hear about metaverse, then we jump on metaverse. Then now we wait until, there's AI and ChatGPT. And then we jump on AI and ChatGPT. And literally in the last 18, 24 months, we've jumped from literally 3 different technologies, or they might be similar, but, and sometimes we find investment, opportunities in those places. So so I'm not sure I really see a trend that I'm excited about, but I'm seeing trends that I feel that could become our own and that we could create. And one of those trends, like I said earlier on, is that Africa can actually feed the world, not from a place of what we're talking about, agriculture and feed the world and go to the farms. No, commodity is going to be one of the biggest solutions to food security or food insecurity in the world in the next 10 years. By the way, one of the top 10 issues in the world is food insecurity. And so Africa is a home of commodities. It's a home of everything, rice, maize. I mean, mention it, from Nigeria to Cameroon to Ethiopia, Rwanda. I really would love for fund managers and investors to really begin to see how do we begin to create funds that would power commodity exports. And by doing that, increases the GDP of the local countries that is driving the exports, because you're then earning USD as a country. And as investors who are serving retail investors or institutional investors, we're well off as a result of it. So I'm really, really, bullish as far as that space is concerned. So I deeply believe that that's one of the major things that will drive our economies over the next 5 to 10 years, if we're deliberate about it. I mean, we are. So commodity is a big chunk of what will be a big part of our strategy and our portfolio mix at Opportunik. So that's the one thing that I would say I'm excited about. I mean, I could speak to what we could do in terms of, the shortage of, for instance, chips in the world, or, there is global supply chain issues that investors could create opportunity, because Africa, DRC, has a huge deposit of some of the precious microfiber needs that the car manufacturing industries will require to build the next light Teslas of this world or power batteries in EV. There's no reason why, Toyota should not have a massive EV factory somewhere in Africa, again, funded by an investment instrument, simply because we have the lithiums, we have the deposits in different parts of Africa. But that's far off. Let's start with commodity.
Brilliant. I agree. You touched on something key, which is Africa's ability to create its own trends that we can call our own, and also the future potential of Africa's commodity space. So if we look at future potential, future of Africa, where do you see Africa's wealth fund investment space in the next 5 years?
So I think in terms of size, we're going to start growing. Actually, I like to believe that. I believe very strongly that there is a massive drive of investment education that is being done across Africa. Look, one of the ways to really become financially free is not by just earning salaries or getting handouts. It's actually really by actively investing and growing that over a long period of time. And there are people who now are actually offering investment educations for Africa. So you look at how many apps and how many platforms are out there now for people to invest. It's a whole lot. So what that is simply speaking to is that some of the Henley report data that comes out about investable fund in Africa could actually now start to go from people's savings accounts to now actually investments accounts, and that would only make the space grow in terms of total asset under management by fund managers. So I believe very strongly in that. And in terms of where investment will be going to, now this doesn't really concern retail investors because at the core of it, retail investors are investing in the fund, and because the fund is discretionary in that, the fund managers, we make the decisions on your behalf in terms of where the funds are going to be invested. So retail investors might not be concerned, but if I were to see places where big capital will most likely go into over the next 5-10 years are places like infrastructure. So there's some countries that require major infrastructure funding. There's a lot of gap in that space. I see funding going in there. I see venture funding continue to rise despite the fact that the market corrected 2 years ago. I mean, there was like so much cash flowing into the continent from everywhere on funding everything from just ordinary ideas to actually real businesses. So I see that picking up gradually. Proper valuation of the companies. So venture funding will be another space that would attract investment. I do see creative investment in other alternatives in the space. For instance, what you call private market. The private market is an interesting space in that, they are typically debt instruments and debt structures. Some are asset-backed, some are not. And those debt structures would also attract investment as well. So those are the places that I feel are currently getting attention. Unfortunately, where I would love to see capital go into will require some people like us making those bold moves to go there. Like I said, commodity, technology funding. I mean, I don't see a reason why we can't drive, why Africa can't be the battery that powers electric vehicles, even though we might not have constant electricity in different places to charge them, but we can export them to places where they do. That for me will be an exciting space where capital could go into. Agriculture will be interesting space because we have what it takes to build those places up internally. We don't need to look outward. We're looking inward for those sort of spaces. So yeah, that's my view of both size and sectors.
Thank you for sharing that great insight. So if we look closer to home, where do you see yourself and Opportunik Global Fund in 5 years' time?
In 5 years' time, in 3 years' time, like I said, we're aiming to be $100 million AUM fund. In 5 years, we're aiming to, from 2023, at least again, 5x that amount, which means that we are going to be $500 million AUM fund.
Wow.
But it's not the asset under management that is important for us. It's the number of retail investors that we're serving. And I deeply believe that this fund easily will serve anything in the region of 250,000 to 500,000 investors across Africa and diaspora. That's what I'm looking at. I'm excited about also something I haven't spoken about is just the talent that, I've seen come out as we build our team, very talented fund managers, young traders, experienced traders, investment management team, risk managers. I've just really been excited, and the fact that we are fully Africans spread across 5 different countries from Nigeria, Zambia, South Africa, Kenya, Mauritius. So we're a truly, truly Pan-African company, and I'm super excited to be leading the team and leading the company.
Brilliant. The future looks positive for OGF, and it's clear that you're unlocking Africa's potential in multiple ways. Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's interesting. Like our mission is actually disrupting barriers. We provide investment opportunities for Africans and Diaspora, unlocking financial freedom for generations. So the word unlock is common to both our company and your platform.
Fantastic. I like that.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Oh, wow. Okay, so I wasn't expecting this one, but I will share. Can I share 2?
Of course, that'd be brilliant.
Okay, so there are 2 for me that are extremely, extremely important. First one is pretty short, and it's called the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule is to do unto others as you want done unto you. So I'm a big believer in the Golden Rule, like literally. And the second one is not a quote; it's more of a poem, and I'm just going to give it to you and you use it however you want.
I like the sound of that.
Here is to the crazy ones, the misfits, the troublemakers, the rebels, the round pegs in the square holes, the one who see things differently. They are not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the one thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Rob Siltonen.
Wow, I love that.
Thank you.
What an amazing way to end today's conversation. Beautiful, beautiful. As we're coming to the end of the conversation, I was wondering if you had closing remarks, final calls to action for people who are interested in what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that we're not crazy enough to think we want to change the world. I am crazy enough to think that I can change Africa. I think that if I change Africa, I think I would have changed the world. And so OGF is one of the instruments and one of the tools for really, really moving Africa forward and moving the middle class wealth creation journey forward. And so really just first step, check us out, ogf.com, read about our team, read about our fund. Let's hear your feedback. Send us your queries at ask@opportunik.com, ask@opportunik.com. And then if you're convinced by our value proposition, which I'm sure you will be, just sign up, create your user account, and then just explore. Try and go through the KYC, even if you're not ready to invest yet. At least pass the KYC and be ready for when you are. And if you're ready to invest, then really just start with $5,000 and then monthly after decide as you wish to add to it. It's a quick step that you can take that really adds no condition to it. Go on the platform opportunik.com and just look us up, check up our team and read more about the fund structure. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our team at ask@opportunik.com. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with everyone. Thanks again, Cesar, for this fantastic opportunity to tell our story and to together unlock opportunities for Africans and diaspora.
Brilliant. It's been fantastic having you on the podcast. Awesome conversation and a beautiful way to end the conversation. I think it's clear, as I said before, you're unlocking multiple opportunities on the continent and looking forward to seeing the disruption that you create within that space. So I'll be keeping a close eye on OGF and very, very positive about the impact and what you will achieve on the continent.
Thank you so much, Cesar, and I wish you the very best with your platform as well. Let it keep growing. I'm looking forward to when you hit 1 million.
Fantastic. Thank you for the support.
You're welcome. Take care.
Take care. We will speak soon. Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.